Hi, today we're going to talk about a few quick tips on capitalization. So, capitalization is really straightforward. If you just remember this main rule that you capitalize the names of specific people, places, and things. So, these are the proper nouns that are specific people and places and things. So, for example, George Washington, Shaquille O'Neal. And here with the apostrophe, we generally capitalize the first word and a letter and then the second. Mom or dad, if you're using it as a name, places: El Paso, Texas; Mars, the Rio Grande; deities: God, Allah, Krishna, Buddha, Ganesh; religions: Hindu, Catholic, Islamic, Rastafarian, Zoroastrian; and then, of course, in books, we capitalize the major words, a writer's reference: Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. So that's the basic rule. And you keep that in mind, that'll get you through most things. Let's look at a few kind of technicalities. So with people, the specific people, I'll call mom. In that case, I'm saying instead of my mom's name was Joy. So instead of saying I'll call Joy, I'm saying I'll call mom. If I can replace it with the name, then I'm going to capitalize it. But if I say I'll call my mom, I wouldn't necessarily say I'll call my Joy, though she was very joyful. So in that case, with mom, dad, aunt, uncle, whatever, just see if you can replace. Restaurants, instead of we went to the restaurant, we went to Casa de Tortas, a local restaurant I highly recommend. Sometimes we use a word in two different ways. For example, I live on Earth. Here, I'm talking about I live on the planet. I like to dig in the earth means I like to dig in the soil or the ground. So you have to think about, am I talking about the proper name of the whole planet, or am I just talking about the dirt? Um, Also, as applies to specific nationalities, for example, American, Comanche, Bolivian, Guatemalan, Lebanese, that's pretty much my family. Departments, the Department of Geology. So it is not just saying it is the technical name for that place. Particular and specific courses: English 0310, Basic English Composition, or Geology 1301. You would say, I am taking Geology 1301 and capitalize geology there because it is the specific course. If you just say, I'm taking geology, there's no capital. Trade names: Kleenex, Starbucks, Betty Crocker. The exception, of course, is if the trade name, if they spell it with a lowercase. For example, iPhone. The I in iPhone is lowercase. So in that case, we do whatever they do with their naming. Um, Here are another other places where it can get confused. For example, Professor Haddix is very nice. Well, obviously this is at the first of the sentence, but even if it wasn't, I talked to Professor Haddix. Because this is part of her name, we're treating it as part of her name, we're going to capitalize professor. Now, if we say my professor was Grace Haddix, in that case, we don't capitalize professor, just her name. First Sergeant Lewis Cross is here. Again, start of the sentence, but if we say, oh, there is First Sergeant Lewis Cross, this first sergeant is acting as part of his name. To simply say the first sergeant is here would not be capitalized. Here's the example we looked at again. Mom is cool. I could say Joy is cool. But my Joy is cool. Well, it still makes sense, but how about let's try Dad. Dad is cool. My Clayton. Wait, my dad's name is Clayton. Was Clayton. Clayton, my Clayton is cool is it's not what I mean. So if you're using a word in place of a name, and here's another one, I say sweetie, do you know I love you? In that case, I'm using it in place of his name. I love my sweetie. It's just general. So those are kind of key things to keep in mind. Run that test through your head when you're working on capitals, and you can always figure it out. Am I using it, especially for things like this? And here too, am I using this as part of a name? Now, with quotes, if the quote is a full sentence, then we're going to capitalize it. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but if you bring the whole sentence in, remember we talked about with brackets, you don't change it. If you change it, you have to put those brackets in there. My mother used to say, oh, there's my comma, because it's used to say, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. So in that case, that W is capital. But if you're just pulling in a part of the sentence, people often get in trouble when they practice to deceive. Don't capitalize that. Only the full sentence. Um, and then after colon, the same thing applies. Is it a full sentence or not? You must do three things. You have to capitalize when needed, write complete sentences, and develop full paragraphs. We could put a period there, and that's why we get to use our colon. This part may be a full sentence or may not, but if it is a full sentence, go ahead and capitalize it. And here you can see we just give a list, so we don't need a capital. You must do three things correctly: capitalize correctly, write complete sentences, and develop paragraphs. Um, and then finally, capitalize your abbreviations according to a convention. So if you're using a common abbreviation or a not so common abbreviation in your paper, the first time you use it in formal writing, spell it out by writing out the words first and then put the abbreviation in parentheses. From then on, only the abbreviation, no parentheses. So the Center for Disease Control, and then we're going to do the abbreviation, put it in parentheses. That just tells people from now on, this is what I'm going to call it. Publishes many advisories to the public. One of the latest CDC bits of advice is to, and here you see all we have to use is the abbreviation, none of the parentheses. So whenever you're doing formal writing, or even in informal writing, if you're using an abbreviation or an acronym that someone's not familiar with, set it up correctly. Spell the whole thing out the first time, put it in parentheses, and then after that, all you have to do is use the abbreviation itself. So that's all pretty straightforward if you just really kind of remember specific names. I mean, whether it is we're talking religions or countries or nationalities or names of people or even those terms of endearment, sweetie, when we use that as a name, capitalize it. And of course, first of sentences, which applies even when you've got a sentence inside your sentence after a colon or in a quote. So either way, that's really the basics of capitalization. If you run through that little test with things you're not sure about and say, am I using this as part of a name? It's really helpful when we're talking about things like the Department of Geology or the Department of English. Do I capitalize that? Then ask yourself, is this a specific name of this place, this specific department? And with those abbreviations, don't forget to set it up first, and then after that, just use the abbreviations. So there you go. There's capitals.